Hey there, it is Joe Parnavila, and welcome back to another episode of Forbes Books Radio. You might have heard that the wine, beer, and spirits industry is pretty lucrative. Scrolling through your Twitter the other day, you might have seen that European beverage company Diageo acquired Ryan Reynolds' gin company, Aviation American Gin, for $610 million. So joining me today is the owner of spirits brand Savage & Cooke, and a guy who was named Winemaker of the Year by Wine Enthusiast magazine. His name is Dave Phinney. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for taking the time. You know, I mentioned it at the top here about Diageo. So I don't know as much about the industry as you do, so that's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on. But it seems like in that whole beer, liquor, and wine industry, it's very much, to me, it seems like a monopoly. You see like 2 or 3 companies owning every piece of booze. Am I way off base here?
You know, I wouldn't call it a monopoly so much as I would say there's some, Diageo, Constellation, Gallo. I would call them sort of the big 3. Mm-hmm. And then it goes from that to essentially craft in the spirits very quickly. There's not a lot of medium-sized folks. I guess we would almost be considered in the sort of medium-sized because we're not considered, craft is considered anything under 100,000 cases, which is kind of ridiculous because that's a huge number. I would say less of a monopoly is the availability for entry is there. It's just hard, really where it becomes a monopoly is on the distribution side. Mm-hmm. It's very, very hard to get attention for anybody. I have a partnership with Gallo. I sold them a series of our wine brands, and I'm very familiar with them and really enjoy working with them. And, they are the world's largest wine company, and they have to fight to get attention.
Yeah, let's talk about that because, and I want to get more into what Savage & Cooke is doing, but this distribution part of it. So you mentioned, so there's a lot of companies and there's also craft companies and there may be a couple middle tier. I guess the trick is, how do you get on store shelves? There's only so many liquor stores and wine shops that have space. How do people manage through that traffic?
You just have to separate yourself and be unique and do hopefully something that somebody else isn't doing. And it's funny because you mentioned Ryan Reynolds. I was on a call yesterday with a very famous celebrity's manager, and we were talking about actually it was the champagne, and then it drifted into whiskey. And I didn't know that Ryan Reynolds had sold that brand. And I used him as an example because I said, look, if the celebrity is just there to endorse it, but they're not passionate about the project, and they're not going to get their back behind it. And I said, I'll give you an example. My understanding is Ryan Reynolds goes to Costco and pours. He takes it that seriously. Then the manager said, he's apparently you don't know what happened. I'm like, no. And then he told me, I'm like, well, you just proved my point. It's like you have to get behind it. Then there are things like sort of unicorn moments with Pink Whitney and Barstool Sports and Spitting Chicklets. That was kind of like a sort of hint of an idea that Gallo took front seat on and made this Pink Whitney. And they can't keep it in stock now. So, that's a, sort of a celebrity endorsement or / organic thing that happened. And you just have to put in the work. It used to be a lot easier because there wasn't so many brands and there were more distributors. So what's happened in the last 15, 20 years in both wine, spirits, and beer to a degree is there's been a proliferation of brands and then a consolidation of distributors. So that's
not a good combination.
No, that's not a good recipe. And so getting that attention has become harder and harder. And it's not just something you can pay to play. There's a lot of laws that don't allow you to do that, but also it just doesn't matter. Some of it is luck, some of it's, timing, some of it's getting that distributor's attention for whatever reason. There's the scoring, from different publications, but you sort of have to do all of that and then get lucky.
Wow. It sounds like a lot, Dave. What are you doing? What are you doing in that business?
I tell you what, the spirits, we got in the spirits business, I think, right before it got too crowded. So, and we already had, a 20-year reputation in the wine business. So we had a little bit of a jump there, and we have a unique story in the sense that, we grow our own grains. We have a unique water source that we own. We are finishing the wine the spirits in some of our once used wine barrels. So, we kind of piled on thick, and it's all true. That's the other thing. It's a good story, and it just so happens to be true. But had we not got in when we got in, I would be nervous. I've had a few different friends and other folks in other businesses, poking around about getting in the wine business or the spirits business. And I said, look, you don't want to get in the wine business. If you're looking to put some money somewhere, here's what you do. Come to Napa, buy a A-grade Cabernet vineyard, sell your grapes and make about 50 cases of wine to give away to your buddies, and watch that asset appreciate. And that's how you should be in the wine business. But you don't want to get into the real wine business. And I would say the same about spirits as well. It's just really crowded.
Yeah.
And of course, during this pandemic, there's a select few brands have just blown up because they were already very sort of user friendly and at the right price point. And, I have a friend whose brand, and I called him on it and he showed me the numbers, increased 5,000% at Costco. But he was positioned perfectly he'd been in the business 20 years, price points right, wines over deliver, labels easy to say. And so I'm really happy for him. And I know, and Gallo's got some of their entry level wines that they can't make enough of right now. So smaller guys, it's been harder with restaurants closing and everything like that.
So Dave, you started the wine company back in the 90s, and 90s I was a 20-something dude, and I just remember people my age drinking hard liquor or beer. But nowadays, you have millennials and younger people embracing wine. It used to be something you drank at a fancy restaurant, but nowadays it's ubiquitous. I mean, you have, fast casual restaurants serving wine. You have a wine shop on every corner. So explain to me how that evolved and your company just explode at the same time.
A lot of the success we had with certain brands was due to the luck and timing. And right in that sort of 2000s, early 2000s is when the Wine Spectator, which is a print magazine, of course they're online now, was getting traction. There was more stuff in the media. It's kind of like we call it the sideways effect, which from the movie which came about. So it was sort of a gradual increase in, call it millennials, looking at the category. And also what I think we were able to benefit from was having a very, at the time, avant-garde label in The Prisoner that was so different from anything else. We were very lucky that we had some sort of small and medium-sized distributors that are actually no longer around because they ended up selling their distribution network to bigger distributors. But at the time, they really got behind us, and without them, we wouldn't have been able to succeed the way we did. And we actually just grew because simply by demand. We would just say to our distributors in New York, all right, how many cases do you want this year? And at one point we were growing by like 500% a year. So it was kind of nuts. And as I said, it was, a lot of it was luck and dovetailing into that, younger generation getting into wine. And, then we had some success with some critics, and wine was starting to appear on, regularly on television shows where they were talking about it. We got some sort of free product placement just because we had some people that liked the wine, so they wanted to use it. And so again, a lot of hard work, but a lot of like lucky breaks. And then, by the time it was getting harder, we were already established.
Awesome.
So we benefited greatly from timing.
So you're killing it in the wine industry, and then all of a sudden, like, I got that. I'm an expert. Now I want to do spirits. Where did that come in?
It's a funny story. So I was kind of a beer and whiskey guy before I got into wine. And then I got away from beer and whiskey. And the president of our company at the time, Brian Sandoli, is a big Manhattan guy, loves bourbon. And at the same time, I also had this distribution network and that were saying, hey, why don't you make brown spirits? Why don't you make brown spirits? And I said, well, I don't really have a passion for it. And everybody knows that, I don't do anything for the money. So there's no motivation. Because when I asked him, I said, well, why should I make brown spirits? And every single one of them said, because we can make a ton of money, because they thought that was going to convince me. And I said, well, there has to be a reason why. Like, I'm not just going to do it to make money. But it definitely, I'm a capitalist, so I listened. But it needed to be authentic and have a story. And so the first thing I did was I started trying a bunch of different bourbons, trying a bunch of different whiskeys, and getting educated. And then what I sort of found out very quickly is that, one of the most important components to any spirit is the water that you use to titrate it, to take the alcohol down from cask strength. And years ago, I bought this 300-acre piece of property up in Sonoma County in Alexander Valley, ostensibly to plant a vineyard that we still haven't planted. but it has this amazing spring that it's undeveloped, and it comes out at 40 gallons per minute, which is insane. And it just burbles right out of the ground. And so we developed the spring, and just because I couldn't stand to see it just going down the drain, so to speak, we had that water tested, and it's really amazing water, and the mineral content is great. We did a blind water tasting, and it easily won. And so there was the beginnings of okay, now we're starting to get a story going here. Then I said, well, what if we took a winemaking approach to it, and we grew our own grains, kind of like, buying grapes and growing grapes, because usually you just buy grains, it's a commodity, right?
Oh, so that's what most spirits do. They outsource that product.
Oh yeah. Okay. There's very few, a handful of producers that grow their own grains. And so we wanted to grow our own grains. So that was another box checked. And then it was like, oh, and what if we finish it in some of our wine barrels? But I said to the team, look, I'm only going to do that if it makes it better. If it doesn't make it better, we're not doing it. That's when I was starting to get excited, but also nervous, because it was such a good part of the story. But what if it doesn't make it better? And what we found out was an amount of it makes it better, but not 100%. So we did a bunch of experimentation for a couple of years, figuring out how much percentage for which spirit, and came to not a formula, but something closer to a formula. And I really give the credit to Jordan Vai, who's our master distiller and just a total genius. Literally. And, he was a trained chemical engineer, and then he got into winemaking, and then he got into distilling. And so it's been a really fun 5-6 years now. And we ended up building a distillery down on Mare Island, which is an old decommissioned naval base. So we took these 3 old buildings, starting from the first building was built in 1864, and old brick, beautiful building. And then as we expanded, it's now in 3 different of these old buildings. And it's been a lot of fun. And the packaging that we chose is definitely not your father's whiskey bottle. And we did that on purpose. I don't call it research. I recently heard a good one. A buddy of mine said, Dave, you don't do research, you do me search. You read a few things and think you know everything. I said, oh, no, I'll take a flyer. But I have been reading a lot about the younger generation. We're starting to drink more brown spirits, and then a lot of younger females were drinking brown spirits. So what we wanted to do was, again, have a label that would appeal to, men and women alike.
It's amazing, talking to you about, your spirits and your wine. And I think when you get in these industries, you almost have to be a bit of an alchemist, because you have to blend so many different modalities. You have the taste, production, distribution, the branding, marketing. Why do people even bother getting into your business? It seems really hard.
I think it is. It could be for certain personalities. Most of the people I know that are successful in the business, and I would include myself as one of these people, maybe not successful, but have a certain amount of ADHD or ADD, because by the time, you're sick of being in the vineyards, it's time to be in the winery. By the time you're sick of being in the winery, it's time to get out and sell, although I still don't like to do that. But by the time it's, you're sick of selling, it's time to come up with a new brand or label. And so I love it, because every day is different. If you like that lifestyle, and you enjoy farming, and you enjoy, doing something different every day, it's awesome. But if you want consistency, this isn't the business for you.
Now, you've name dropped some members of your team, and I've read an interview you did where you said it's essential to spend a lot of time screening and hiring top quality people, and it's essential to trust them. Tell me about that screening process, because now that you've been doing this, since the 90s, you probably have a good radar on who's a good fit and who's not for your team. So how do you decipher that?
It's something that I sort of learned, I'll call it accidentally, years ago. And now I've heard it. I listen to way too many podcasts, but I've heard it from a lot of much smarter people than me. But it's that idea that you hire people. And I think I have 25 and 30 employees right now, because we had some people come in to help us with some temporary stuff. But of our core group of employees, one of the things I'm most proud of is we've only ever lost 2 employees. One was my sister-in-law, because she got pregnant and wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And the other was this guy, Neil, who was a great guy, but he got caught weighing out some weed in the kitchen next to our office. So I had no choice but to fire him. So that's something I'm probably the most proud of. And it's because we're a tight knit group, but everybody multitasked, everybody, started here and now they're there. I mean, Brian Sandoli, who started with me doing direct sales for Orange Swift on a commission based only, I couldn't even afford to pay him, became the president of the company. And he was educated and knew all that, but he was a friend of a friend. I mean, most people that come to work with us, and I think that's very important too, is I really pound into everybody that you don't work for me. We work together. And basically, the only reason I'm going to know you're not doing your job is if I know you're not doing your job. Otherwise, I'm just going to let you do your thing. And I don't, try to micromanage. But the one thing I will say that I think is important is that, it's a democracy till it's not. Like, I'm going to listen to everything you're going to tell me. I'm going to ask you questions, and then I'm going to make a decision. It might be the exact opposite of what you suggested. And don't get offended. If you rule by committee, nothing gets done. So at the end of the day, I don't mind, making the decision and living by it. And it's my, if it doesn't work out, it's on me, nobody else.
That's awesome. Now, before I let you go, I heard a lot of spirit brands made hand sanitizer during that sanitizer shortage during the height of the pandemic. Did you guys jump into the fray as well?
We did. And it was, again, one of those sort of 30-second discussion with Jordan, our distiller, and Lauren Blanchard, who runs the distillery. We had access to the 30,000 gallons of what we were told was, at the time, the last denatured alcohol available in the U.S. And so we didn't have bottles, we didn't have anything. And so we ended up just jumping in with both feet. We ended up doing, I'm only using the numbers because it shows just how crazy things were and sort of scary. But we did $2.5 million in sales in 2 months, and we'd never obviously been in the business.
Wait, hold on a second. You made $2 million selling hand sanitizer?
Yeah. It was a really tough decision because I didn't want to be like a profiteer. I felt really strongly that that's just not how I was raised. Like, I'm not going to take advantage of a situation. But what we found out is it was the opposite. Is people were like, no, we need it. Like, you're doing, and we want to pay you, because if we don't pay you, you're not going to be able to continue to make it. We were selling to the U.S. Post Office, the state of Florida, multiple hospitals. To me, it was insane who was in need. So we were just helping out a need. But what we were insistent upon is that we sold the product at, it was either 20 or 30% below pre-pandemic pricing. And then we had a special discount for municipalities, hospitals, first responders. And then we had a charitable aspect. But like I said, most of the time we were trying to give it away. People said, no, we want to pay you because we've been given a grant or a budget. We want you, otherwise you're not going to be able to continue to make it. So even with that discount, the margins are insane. We spoke to the FDA. We contemplated actually getting in that business because I was like, this is insane. It's 3 ingredients, and it's easy to do, and we can make it better and provide it for cheaper. And so we contemplated getting in the business full time. And then now, it's hand sanitizer is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And we've gotten back to our core business, but it was a crazy couple months there.
Wow, that is a great story. Now, before I let you go, because you seem like you have your pulse on the whole liquor industry. So the hard seltzer industry, does that amaze you as to, like, literally, if you are some sort of liquor company, you have to have a hard seltzer? Like, did you see this coming at all?
So it's funny you should ask that. So I like to say I have a love-hate relationship with White Claw, because 2 years ago or whenever, it was July 4th, we were at our place in Vermont. My wife shows up from the store, comes back with my brother-in-law, and she's got these White Claws. And I'm like, what is that? She's like, oh, wait till you see. And so she poured one over ice, and I was like, oh my God, this is 5% alcohol. They're 100 calories. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is amazing. Like, what a great idea. But I'm a packaging guy. So I look at the package and I was like, that is the worst package I've ever seen. It became a little bit of an obsession. And then I was like, okay, there's Truly and there's Corona and Bud, and everybody's getting into it. But they're all kissing cousins. All the packaging is like kind of similar, and the products are okay, but some are better than others. But it's almost like a fad. But I'm convinced it's here to stay. So my friend Joe Wagner, myself, Gallo, and possibly one other partner are days away from releasing our our hard seltzer.
Oh, that's hysterical. That's so
Yeah.
funny. You know why I think I agree with you where it's here to stay is I think it's one of those tastes. It fits into that beer space. Whereas, like, I know there have been trends. Like, I remember the hard lemonade trend. You had the trend of like the hard root beers. I think those cater to such a small percentage of people. But the hard seltzer, and like the things you mentioned, the low calorie, the 5% alcohol, it just seems like it fits. It fits into that space of beer, wine, alcohol, hard seltzer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think I'm only teasing White Claw, but what they did was an amazing job of the right amount of flavor, the right amount of sweetness. It's not overly sweet. It's not overly tart. It's not overly acidic. It's not too tonic. It's just, they nailed that. And so what we did is with the food science folks from Gallo, we're like, all right, well, obviously, how can we make it better? How can we make it organic, natural, everything? I wish I could tell you about the water source because that's a whole another crazy story, but we're still working through that, which is where this third partner would come in who will definitely jumpstart this thing. But I think it's a category that's here to stay.
And if you think about it, it's already been around. I mean, I'm as basic as it comes. When you go to a bar, how many times do you hear someone say, "Give me a vodka soda"? I mean, it's basically a packaged vodka soda, with the hard seltzer brand and whatever hell you want to call it. But it's something that's been around. I like to joke that like Apple has never came up with an original idea. All they do is they take an idea and they make it better. They were never the first to do an MP3 player or laptop or tablet. They just made them better. And I think that's sort of what happened with the hard seltzer industry. Mm-hmm. This is something people have been drinking for eons, and now all of a sudden they package it in such a way that's easily consumable. It's, people who are watching their weight. It's low calorie. It's just enough alcohol. And at the end of the day, it is a booming business.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, Professor Scott Galloway, who's a professor at Stern Business School at NYU, and read a lot of what he writes and listen to a lot of what he says. And he's got a great one where he always says the second mouse gets the cheese. I think this is a perfect example of that. It's a business that it's just wide open and everybody's trying to get into it, but everybody's kind of doing the same thing. If you look at a can of White Claw and a can of Truly and a can of Coronas and a can of the Bud Light one, and you can just go down the list. They all have that same color-coded ring on top. And, it's like
the same narrow can. I mean, literally, the cans look exactly the same. It's pretty funny. Well, I'm looking forward to what you got because I was actually able to get a bottle of your Burning Chair bourbon whiskey. So I'll give that a try because, like I mentioned, I'm a vodka soda guy. But I figure I'm old enough now that I can move into the brown spirits. But I'm looking forward to what you do in the hard seltzer space. And I just want to thank you for your time and all the information you share with me because I'm kind of a curious and nosy folk, so I'd love to speak to people who are experts in their field and are succeeding. So thank you very much for the time.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
His name is Dave Phinney. He is the owner of spirits brand Savage & Cooke. And that is it for this edition of Forbes Books Radio. You can like and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.